Enough of that.
It's a good way to go live. All right, we're back here on Thursday afternoon, and we are asking Commissioner Hanford to come back and to speak more specifically about the administration's proposals, versions of which appear in H111 in our committee, but also in the Senate bill that passed through the Housing Committee in the Senate yesterday. So there's a few specific. So Josh, we had a conversation with the Deputy Finance Director yesterday, and he just pointed out that the VHCB, the PTT transfer was a base number of 11.4, and there's extra $10 million on top of that. And then there's $36 million that was put aside in the budget for other projects, which I believe is an increase to VHIP, an increase to an increase or more money allocated to missing middle housing, and also the proposal for a new program for the missing middle rental revolving loan fund. And so those are the main things that are in the budget, I think, from your committee right now, or from your department right now, that is in front of us, and we have to respond next week into the budget memo. But I guess one question before we even start, everything that's in the budget, putting the PTT and the VHCB money aside, this question is just about the $36 million of general fund money. I asked you right before the break about is the money still federal money if it was ARPA money, and now we're talking about general fund money. In the case of the BAA, where $9 million is being asked to fill that $24 million request, how does that work when the first chunk of money was ARPA money, I believe, last year, and then this chunk of money would be general fund? Is there any more ARPA money that's being reallocated, that's coming back and being able to reallocate it in a way to make things like that whole? Or I don't know the status. I haven't heard a minute of conversation about any kind of spillover money that might exist on the federal funding.
Yeah, happy to be back. Josh Hanford, Commissioner of Housing and Community Development. Thanks for going through the presentation that I went through with you before. Hopefully it's a resource. This, I think, is going to be more questions and me just trying to answer. And, I just came before the committee, first testimony today in front of House Probes going over our budget. So a lot of this stuff is fresh. So to answer your first question about in the BAA, the Senate added $9.2 million of general fund to help address the backlog of the missing middle homeownership applications. That is general fund. It shouldn't impact how the program is run, because for the housing developers, builders, and the homeowners that are getting a subsidized home, they wouldn't know what type of funds it is anyways. The reporting for VHFA and us will be different now that this new phase is general fund. It'll be much simpler. It'll be more cost effective, to be honest. The federal funds has several steps and processes to go through, and reports and treasury oversight. I'm not aware of a pot of ARPA funding that we can reallocate yet. I've heard that in the Senate bill, the Home Act that was just passed out of committee, they're intending for one of the programs they have in there, which is a rental sort of eviction prevention pool, to be ARPA if it's available, but I haven't heard that there's anything available as of yet. So hopefully that answers that specific piece. In regards to the governor's FY24 budget, he didn't propose new money for the missing middle home ownership. That program just launched. We haven't started. We had heard over the summer, a meeting with VHFA and a number of developers, this additional sort of need for a revolving loan fund that could revolve. Since we have one-time money, housing's a crisis, let's put some tools let's deploy some tools that can kind of live on. And we heard from a lot of developers, especially in these sort of rural outreach across the state, that there's a lot of development projects, 5, 6, 10 units here or there that are meant for that sort of workforce housing, that rental housing just above affordable housing developments, which most of the funding sort of caps at 60% AMI. So from that area, 60% AMI up to 120, missing middle, meaning, there isn't a program to fund those developments and you're not making enough money that you can compete in this market. And that VHFA sort of designed a program that they had heard. They'd gone out to talk to developers, also banks and other lenders, like, would you be able to support this program with this work, which provides below interest, below market rate loans for both construction and permanent debt into these projects that could fill a gap. Because we have a chart of an imaginary deal. It's not very imaginary, it's a real deal, but we took the names off, that just shows you if you were building a 10-unit apartment, a multifamily in any town, Vermont, to have those rents serve people at 100% of area median income, there's a $3 million gap. You can't get financing to build that apartment. And so the rents can't cover the cost. Those units aren't being built. If you move down to the affordable rent, we have programs, tax credits, VHCB, others that will cover 100% of that cost. And so it takes till you get above charging rents for folks that are above 120% AMI and even above that to actually cash flow. So the idea behind this was provide a subsidy with a lot of rules and requirements that would cover that gap. There would be a loan period, 10 years. When that money's paid back, it goes into a fund that just keeps rolling it forward. During this compliance period, rents would have to be capped, no more than 3% increase each year. You're buying this public investment and getting these units built that wouldn't otherwise be built. And the difference of why do we not have this? Why is this missing? Why is this important? It's different than perpetual affordable model. The investment per unit is much lower in these cases, probably below $100,000 per unit. And you're getting 10 years of affordability. You're getting that unit built and the money's recycling when it's paid back to do more. That was what we heard and VHFA heard from lots of developers out there, that there's no source to cover this gap. You can even mix some of these units in an affordable housing project to get a true mixed income development. Right now, the low-income housing tax credits and other conditions on the affordable housing dollars really cut off. Most of it's at 60% AMI. There's another step at 80% AMI. And so unless there's funding to encourage the building of units above that, they have to cash flow on what the market can provide for capital and what you can charge for rents. And they just don't. I think this is interesting that under the housing revenue bond of a few years ago that was $37 million that the governor supported, legislature supported, went to VHCB. 25% of those units, this was the governor's condition, had to be market rate, missing middle. So during the period of this bond deployment, we have a lot of affordable housing that was built, still being built, that has 25% of the units at market rate and the rest at affordable, which is truly healthy housing. But it was only because it was mandated that this bond covered that, because there's typically not a source to pay for that. So this program was in recognition that this is missing from our toolbox. And it sounds unique and new to us in Vermont, but practically every state in the country has a program like this that provides some sort of subsidy. You get public benefit. It's not as deep of a subsidy, and it's not a perpetual affordability that you're buying, because this will cost on average at least a third, if not less than that, of the cost that we would subsidize a perpetual unit. There's ongoing requirements and overview, and this is not that. But it can work in conjunction with perpetual affordable housing in deals, and we're getting a true healthy mixed income housing project built. It can also be for rehab. It can be as small as 2 units built. So the governor proposed $20 million in his budget to launch this pilot program. So now we have a middle income homeownership development pilot and a middle income rental pilot that's an RLF. The homeownership program doesn't have the same mechanism that you can recapture the funds through an RLF. The money is granted, it's a subsidy. Some of it goes to the builder to cover the value gap of building the property. The rest stays in the home for the future buyers to benefit from. So there's no way to recapture where we're doing rental development and it's for market rate, so to speak. There's an expectation that they can pay this money back and we can recycle it for those units that they're able to charge higher rents for because it's market rate. So that's the theory behind this. It's really based off of VHFA's design. The governor just also recognized this. I recognize this, and they had heard this from developers that are struggling to build these units or to reach this income band in existing affordable housing developments, and sort of developed a program. They've met with developers, they've met with banks, credit unions, because they're going to leverage this money and turn it into more and essentially offer 1% to 2% interest loans, where right now the market's at 7, 8, maybe it's going to keep creeping up. So you're buying this below market rate permanent and construction debt with this funding. And how many units is it going to create? I've been asked that already. It's pretty broad because they have conditions on this that at least the Senate proposal puts 2 caps. The more affordable units going down to 65% AMI, the 80 to the 100% AMI down to 65% AMI, you're allowed a higher subsidy up to, I think their bill was $125,000 per unit. If justified, it's still a maximum of 35% of the development cost. And then the higher income units, 100% up to 120, you get a less of a subsidy. I think it's 75,000 or 100,000 cap, but that's only if you need that amount. Some projects maybe only need 50 to fill the subsidy. They're going to have to underwrite these projects. VHFA is the largest affordable housing lender in the state. So this is all they do is underwrite. These projects have profit caps for the developers, just like we have in other programs. And so the units have certain conditions and priorities of where they're located. And I think the real kicker here is there's prioritization for funding of projects that employers kick in money instead of them building their own housing, which a lot of them are doing out of desperation. It's not the best practice to have company-owned housing because you're not only their landlord, you're their boss, but they're doing it out of desperation because no one's able to fill this market, so they're paying for it. So this program would encourage employers to invest some money in housing they don't own, but their employees can have access to. It would prioritize projects where communities put some of their local ARPA money in it because they're all saying housing is the biggest priority. So it's going to build a stack of other money that could leverage. As far as this is going to be very competitive. I think they feel that day one this opens, there's already going to be enough applications to fully consume this proposal, which is a good thing. But I see some
Representative Burrows and Chestnut County.
What does RLF stand for?
revolving loan fund.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
Representative Chestnut County.
The up to a third, that's between 80 and 65 or 165. Does that have any longer time frame for remaining affordable, or is that also once the loan is done plus 3 years?
Yeah, so the construct is, and it'd be really great to have either Maura or Seth Leonard, who's the main developer that divided this, go into the details. But the construct that they have is the loans are a minimum of 10 years. Some can go out to 30. And so as long as there's a loan, there's affordability restriction on it. And then 3 years after you've paid off the loan, you still can't raise the rents more than 3% a year, which is equivalent to, they've got data that suggests over the last 20 years, the average inflation index for rent increases is between 3 and 4%. So there's as much protections as you can buy with a subsidy this shallow compared to the other method, which is, 100% debt-free grants and incentives for perpetual affordable housing, which has to maintain that affordability and has access to capital to reinvest every 15 to 20 years to keep those apartments in good condition. And so, I think what they heard, what I've heard is if you are going to require more than this, then the costs are going to be double. And it's not really, you're not really getting more units for the value. Yeah.
upkeep money.
Yeah.
So, okay, thanks. So my question was that if there's is that third treated any differently beyond the life of the loan? And no, it's not.
No, they all have the same conditions for the affordability ban. It's that because recognizing that you're going to be able to charge less rent for those incomes, you get a higher subsidy to develop the unit per unit because you won't have as much cash flow coming in afterwards.
And that's a requirement that they have to drop the rent to an affordable level, or, because again, the market being the market.
So this is income based. So the rents have to be affordable to those incomes with our standard that they spend no more than 30% on total housing costs. So the same way we would restrict rent in any other, affordable unit for someone's income. Yeah, so the rents are restricted. So that was 20 million in the governor's budget. It's 20 million in the Senate version this passed, and I believe it's also 20 million in the H111, matching what the governor proposed. The next item is VHIP. In the governor's 24 budget proposes 15 million. In the Senate version, they bumped that up to 20 million. And I believe the House still has it at 15. I'd have to.
11 is just, we've had a walk through.
Yeah.
It's not, but yes, it's that version of it.
It's either 15 or 20. It's
We
either
haven't taken a stand on it yet, so.
It's either matching the governor's proposed ask or upping it. And you asked about the BAA. The governor's BAA proposed 5 million right now to continue VHIP with the existing rules and existing program requirements, because we already have demand from the homeownership centers exceeding what we have on hand. So it was, kind of meant to move through quickly, give the indication that we can keep funding you as people propose projects. The FY24 15 million comes with some requested changes that I mentioned earlier about being able to serve people that are in unsafe housing right now, so they can have that housing upgraded, prevent them from being evicted and the unit being upgraded on their own by the landlord that then is going to obviously raise the rents. So this would be a stabilization tool as well that we don't currently have. And then it sort of just clarifies the confusion better around the ADUs and existing units. And it allows for new unit creation on a property that already has an existing unit, where these are all responding to opportunities from the homeownership centers that were saying, we've got a property owner that not only would, take the property they own that's vacant, abandoned, non-code compliant, make 2 units out of that, once was a single family home, but also convert the garage to an apartment. Now we get 3 units. We can't do some of those things the way VHIP is structured now, because there was very specific limits on only taking existing blighted properties and turning it into housing, not creating a new unit on a property. And so there's a proposal, this proposal that passed the Senate, and it's in H11, addresses that. But it also puts a reasonable, that no more than 5 new units could be created. Like VHIP is not meant to fill the pit in Burlington with, $150,000 grants. It's meant to be small scale and recognizing that this money is meant to be spread around. So, as we discuss the bill in there, I'm sure there'll probably be more questions around these changes to VHIP. And I'd also suggest, I could bring in Sean, who's much more on the ground with this program oversight, Sean Gilpin, the department, and then the homeownership centers are sort of the best advocates for this, since they're the ones working on this program on the ground and hearing the requests. I've heard that they maybe even want a further expansion, but I won't get into that because we haven't considered it. They can ask, and I don't know where the governor stands on it yet, but they have another proposal I believe they'll share with you at some point. So those are the 2 big new housing dollars in the governor's FY24 budget. I think you've mentioned VHCB as well. I think there was some inaccurate references to how much VHCB was supported in the budget that I've seen in a lot of newsletters from some advocates. I've seen as little as 10 million. It was 24.4 million. It was 11 and a half property transfer tax, 3 million, a little over 3 million in the capital bill, and 10 million in one time. So it was roughly $3 million short of the full statutory funding of VHCB, but I've seen it characterized as only 10 million. So that's a point of clarification. In the Senate's housing bill, there's a $25 million line item for VHCB. And I'm unsure if that's in addition to the governor's 24.5, or that's just carve out that, yes, this bill also is essentially providing providing 25 million close to the governor's request. And that's sort of separate from the 25 million that is in the BAA for VHCB. That I know for a fact the 25 million in the Senate housing bill is separate in addition to the 25 million that's in the BAA for VHCB. Currently, that's what the Senate moved it from 50 million down to 25. So, those are the main housing things. We do have some one-time ups that are not as much directly related to housing development that I could go into if you want. They're community development efforts. Really quickly, there's a land value tax feasibility study. It's $150,000. This is something we've talked with colleagues in House Commerce, and others have been interested in this. We currently assess property in a community, and they pay their property taxes on it by the value of the property. Every community has a property or two that's right in downtown, on public water and sewer, Main Street, good broadband, that the owner is just letting it fall apart. It's vacant, and every year, the assessed value goes down, and they're just sitting on it. You could charge fees and penalties, but it really doesn't result in the reinvestment of that property. And our tax structure, actually, the more you invest in to make it more valuable, the more you're taxed. There's a different model out there that a few cities around the country, a few around the world, a few nations have established, and there's a leading expert that's visited with us twice in Vermont. Burlington's doing a study on this right now, where you take in these certain districts where you have all this public infrastructure we've all paid for, and you tax on the parcel, the acreage. And so it encourages you to reinvest in that property. Why are you letting it fall down and not reinvesting it if you're paying the same taxes as your neighbor on the same acreage? It's a way to get people to invest rather than to be rewarded for not investing and getting a lower tax bill. And so this is a study to look at that. It's a major tax policy change. I know that Ways and Means have already heard a presentation on it. And our department, Community Revitalization and Planning Division, is saying we should be looking at this, because I've heard this same problem from numerous legislators. And we've got two examples in our Main Street in Randolph, that two houses right on Main Street with all the services in the world, and they've been vacant for 10 years. They're both assessed at about $45,000, and they're out-of-state owners that are just waiting for something. And yet they have all these benefits and are taking up prime property. If their assessed value was the same as their neighbor that has got 4 apartments in there and a deli downstairs, and the place is just kicking off revenue, that property owner is probably going to invest in that and start to create revenue, or they're going to sell it to someone else, because the taxes are going to be the same on those two parcels, because you're using the same services that the public's paid for. It doesn't work everywhere. It works in areas where there's investment been made, and you have to carve out for nonprofits and churches and schools that don't pay. There's a way to do that, but this is a study on that. I think it's got a lot of positive feedback so far. There's a small up for some money to support Vermont's 250th commission. Every state, we're going to be celebrating our 250th anniversary as a nation coming up, and every state is being asked to form a commission, put some money into it to plan for events and education and outreach. And so, as the department that oversees the Division of Historic Preservation, we need to have a commission and really plan for our big birthday party coming up in a few years. So that's a small, it's $117,000. And then a real small one, it's only $18,000, is a match for the Council on Rural Development. I'm sure folks are aware of them. They help communities all around the state plan for their future. They're going after a very large grant, and they need a match from the state in order to get this. I think it's a $10 million grant. And so we put in our budget to be able to help them with the match, $18,000 as an up. So those are the one-time ups. In the last one, because I know there's questions, in our base budget, we have an up of $800,000 to support the designated downtown organizations. Last year, the legislature asked us why we weren't supporting them. They heard from the Downtown Coalition, once they get this designation, they're required to have a staff person, and the community has to support the staff person. And they get a lot of revenue from donations and fundraisers by local businesses on Main Street. Well, they're having a hard time with extra money supporting them. We've relied on these downtowns for the vibrancy of our downtowns. They do a lot of work, but they get no support from the state. So this is operation grants and an ongoing way to help the 24 designated downtowns fulfill their role that we've all asked them to do with some small ongoing operating funding. Not at the same level as our RPCs and our RDCs, but to recognize that they're doing really important work and they have a requirement to have a staff person to meet the requirements of this program. And communities have to kick in something, but it's not enough. Many of these are half-time positions, and we're going to support them if this is approved. And it was asked of us last year by both appropriations committees on the House and Senate why we weren't funding them. And so that we said, give us the summer to plan with them what this would look like, how we could develop an ask that's right-sized, and that's what this $800,000 up represents in our base. And so that's the extent of our new requests for money and programs.
So Commissioner, going back to the missing middle programs and VHIP programs for that matter, those programs in the past couple of years have been funded through ARPA dollars or CRF dollars or what have you, it's federal money. Mm-hmm. By asking for general fund dollars, is that an equivalent of baking this into the budget? Is there going to be an expected line item for these amounts of money for these projects, do you think, moving forward using general fund dollars?
So these are all one-time. The governor was very clear that we weren't building in base programs other than for housing. The only base funding was to VHCB, and then this $800,000 for the downtowns. I believe in the Senate bill, one of the small allocations to sort of continue that mobile home improvement program that I talked about that was one-time $4 million from last year. Their intent is for $500,000 to be a new base to offer those services to mobile home communities ongoing way. That wasn't in the governor's budget. I think the governor was very concerned about adding new base expectations to a budget that is probably going to somehow, start to not have this type of one-time revenue. So, that's the only way I can answer that these are one-time requests since the, expected surplus this year kind of would suggest we have a housing crisis and we should put more of that surplus into housing.
Okay. No, thank you for that. It's just, and again, how many, you said 408?
So far, VHIP, that was as of beginning of December. So it's probably more now. We get quarterly reports, but 408 to date with just over 300 that are serving folks exiting homelessness at an average cost of $31,000 per unit. I expect that that's going to start to go up because now we have the $50,000 cap, which you're allowed up to $50,000 if you're creating a new unit, a new ADU, or you're building a 3-bedroom or larger apartment. The 30 cap is still 2-bedroom and smaller. And so, with a 20% match minimum from the property owner. And so I suspect costs are going up. People are responding. They're hearing the need for larger apartments for some families, especially from the New American Refugee community. That was a new preference that we added for the program. And it's just really hard for large multifamily properties that we're building to build 3-bedroom units in that design. And so some of our existing housing stock, these big old Victorian homes, they do work well for 3-bedroom apartments. So,
Representative Chestnut Tantrum?
See if I lost it between this and that. So give me a moment. Oh, it's about the ADUs originally envisioned as definitely subsidiary units, 900 square feet or less. And I'm just wondering, in expanding the availability of funds to new construction, multi-unit apartments, are we just kind of negating the usefulness of ADU distinction?
right. No, that's a great, and that was quite a bit of debate on that in Senate ED. One committee member in particular is very supportive of the ADU and specifically calling it out. And there was concern that it might be diminished because we can build other units. And in fact, there was a proposal to require us to at least fund 20% of the new VIAT money towards ADUs. Didn't end up passing, wasn't in the bill. And my commitment back was we're doing reports. We're reporting every year on these funds, and we think that we're still going to see the majority of these units go towards rehabbing existing properties that are offline, because with $30,000 or $50,000, it's really hard to think that this money is building a new housing it's just not. And so that's the low hanging fruit. It's going to be most beneficial. Sure, we hope there's some cases where this money, we've got 24 ADUs under construction right now. There's still going to be a demand for that. We're doing some promotion around that right now. The last year's legislation required us to spend $800,000 towards marketing ADUs, providing technical assistance and resources. So we expect we're going to get increased demand for ADUs. But the Senate bill does, I think, make ADUs more flexible and easier to understand the regulations, because it was a little confusing. This subsidiary, it couldn't be this, it had to be this, it had to be that. There was some work done that makes it a little easier to understand how ADUs fit, because the original ADU legislation in Vermont goes back to 1992. And really there was some work on it last year, but the language kind of took you on two tracks. A lot of ADUs aren't public buildings. If you're not renting it to the public, it's not a public building. It's meant for your family member or friend. You don't have to meet habitability code, fire safety, be subject to inspections, any of that. So it falls down a separate track. The ones we're funding are public buildings. You're renting it to the public. It has to meet habitability. It has to have a code inspection. Your intent is to rent it to the public. There was a lot of confusion out there of people saying, oh, I want to do an ADU. And a lot of guidance they were given is, well, do whatever you want, because ADU in people's mind was mother-in-law apartment. Well, and that's our argument was, why are we even carving out ADUs? Now we're allowing duplexes by right everywhere. It's just another type of an apartment. And our view was that really is a better housing policy to say, if you've got a single family house and you want to have a duplex, you maybe live in one side, you rent the other, or you rent both of them, or what have you. It really doesn't matter. The ADU is kind of a legacy of more restrictions, but there's a lot of folks that really like the ADU as a by right ability for someone to live in their home and then add a unit. So we kind of met in the middle in there, and what this legislation coming out of Senate does.
Just wondering, with some of the proposed zoning changes, which are some are geared specifically to ADUs, and I'm just wondering if are we muddying the waters around ADUs?
I think we're actually making them we're clarifying them, because they were very muddy. So anywhere where a single family home is allowed, it can now be a duplex, but you can't then add an ADU to both of those and now have created a 4-unit dwelling. And so there's some language that really kind of clarifies what was rather confusing in that bill.
Can local municipalities override federal or state regulations on things like the zoning changes that we're contemplating, especially, it's specific to ADUs, or short-term rentals or duplexes or is it state regulations that supersede local?
How this would work, my understanding is how this would work. If this bill passes, it becomes the law and the communities have to comply with these new zoning mandates. They'll be given some time to go through their process to implement them. We'll be giving them some grants to help, but regardless, it's now the zoning law. For example, on the anywhere where a single family home is allowed, you must also allow a duplex. A community can't say, nope, we're not complying with that. On the ADU, it does give the community a right to further regulate ADUs. They can allow it to be owner occupied only or not owner occupied. They can allow it to be bigger. The zoning laws that the state has enacted is a minimum. Another good example is in this bill, it requires the municipalities can't require more than 1.5 spaces of parking per unit. It doesn't mean that the developer can't say, well, my units are going to require 3 spaces per unit because that's what I'm building large homes. It just says you as a municipality can't automatically require more than 1.5 spaces per unit. A municipality can always be allowed more than that or go, you know what I mean? But it's setting the floor, if that makes sense. Yeah.
In the case of, I believe I saw language, and I can't remember now if it was in H111 or in the Senate draft of the bill as of last week. I haven't seen the version that's passed now, but there was language about, and we had a walkthrough of I guess H111, so it must have been in there about the any units any ADUs. I guess there was confusion about ADUs at all can't be used as short-term rentals, or is it ADUs that have received state money can't be used as short-term rentals? And did that mean that they can't be used as short-term rentals forever or for just the length of the years of the loan or grant?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Under the VHIP section of the bill that has changes, it further clarifies that the VHIP property can't be used for short-term rental, which was already covered under the covenant and statutes, but it like putting it out there since we're promoting ADUs to be funded, creation of them through VHIP, not be used for short-term rental. For the period of compliance we have, 10 years down the road, that property sales, a community could try to regulate that at the local level that they have an ADU can't be X, Y, and Z, but there's nothing in that bill that changes statewide to say ADUs, if they're not receiving any public funding, can't be used for short-term rentals.
So it's tied to the funding.
It's tied to the funding and it's tied to a municipality that might enact further restrictions on short-term rentals that they could undertake. That's my understanding of, because there was a discussion about that and it also got confusing. There was a number of title attorneys and others in like, how do you enforce that when it's sold over and over again? And the reality is even the provision that some communities have of, well, if you have an ADU, there must be an owner occupied. They must live in the main unit. Forget it, whether it's short-term rental or restricted or not. How do you verify that over time? So someone spends 6 months in Florida, they still own it, they're still there. And the fact that if you're encumbering the sale, local zoning doesn't truly transform on a deed. So like they were kind of saying, you can have aspirations about some of this, but the reality is how you're able to enforce it and ensure that down the road might get a little hard to enforce that intent.
That's just something.
In the reams of data that you collect and present, do you collect information on short-term rentals?
Sure. So VHFA has housingdata.org, which is the main data source. We funded through a grant to VHFA probably 5 years ago to start that as we need one source of data in the state that can be updated. They buy data from AirDNA, which is they compile short-term rentals, and they've now just upgraded their data source, their contract to get more granular data about the number of units and the detail And then they, update that on their community profiles, and there's a short-term rental subset website that you can see the trends. You can go by community. You can look, and this new data, you'll see changes from year to year. People, I think what's not often understood as much as it should is that short-term rentals change from time to time. Sometimes they're not short-term rentals for 6-8 months, and then they're short-term rental again. Then they're, some of these, especially if you're renting to folks that are here traveling nursing or some job, as soon as they've been rented for more than 30 days, they're now a long-term rental. But that data of short-term rental use is not going to catch up for that for another year. And so it's, you have to take the short-term rental data with a grain of salt because it's changing, and you can buy a lot and get a lot of information, but it's constantly changing and evolving. And each community, what they have as a short-term rental problem or benefit is different from community to community. How they might want to address it might be very different from one to another. Like, for example, the town that has the most regulations on short-term rentals is Killington, but they love short-term rentals. It's lodging, they're a resort, but they did it to protect life safety, well overflows from, houses that were zoned for 4 people and they're having 30 people staying in them over a weekend. So their use of short-term rental data and why they regulate it at town level is much different than maybe why a Burlington or another town might want to look at short-term rentals. So at the local level, before you decide what you want to do to regulate, you need to understand, have a conversation. What is it you want to do? What is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the specific data you need to make the right decisions around that? And it's not uniform from community to community. And I think Moore Collins probably gave this stat that I think it's about 3 or 4% of Vermont's housing stock is in short-term rentals. And half of that are second vacation homes that also the homeowner uses as a short-term rental.
Right.
So probably leaves about 1.5% to 2% of housing stock that is in short-term rentals that might not otherwise be.
Other questions for the commissioner right now? About the requests. I mean, we have the numbers down. We have received some explanation now from the administration about the programs.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, anytime, I know there is some confusion out there about the 2 missing middle programs. One's a rental RLF, one's continuing the home ownership pilot. And the new one was in the governor's budget, and adding more to last year's one wasn't, but it's been added. And so I can see why there's confusion. And the missing middle is just getting at, that's the income we're trying to help with both programs, because they're below if you made enough money, you could compete in the market at a certain level, and they're above where our affordable housing programs stop. That's the only reason why that middle is being used.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any thoughts, any comments before we go off live? Let's go off.